Springfield's Talk 1041 and a good Tuesday morning. Some rain. 50% chance it will continue through the day. Look at the first alert forecast here in mere moment. State of the Union tonight. We're going to stick with our regular programming. Of course, there'll be conversation about State of the Union. We're going to stream it, right?
That's
right.
right.
It's going to be anywhere that you want to see it. It's going to be most places you don't want to see it. I think we know what to expect. This isn't going to be any delivery of insight. There's all this speculation and pre-gaming as to what can we expect, I'll just give you the overall theme. One, everything's doing better than you think it is. You just don't get it. You don't understand all of the wonderful things that this administration has done for you. And we've heard this. I mean, this isn't anything new. Buttigieg laughably over the weekend was asked by Chuck Todd, who was like, I mean, this president, he certainly has so many things that he can tout as successes. Why isn't it connecting to the American people? And Buttigieg said, he's done so many wonderful things. So many wonderful things for you. Things are so much better, it's hard to distill them down. It's just because they're so plentiful. This isn't a difficult question to answer. When they talk about why is it the American people have not, let me simplify it for you here. Why it is that you and I don't appreciate and understand the successes of the Biden administration. Because their successes do not equal our successes. It's as simple as that. When they do start touting a laundry list of the accomplishments, they talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, which, of course, increased inflation. They talk about the massive spending bill when it comes to infrastructure. They talk about the Microchip Act. And while some of these things you could sit down and argue are beneficial, are needed, I'm not saying that, but one could argue that. That's not the problem that the average American is having over the last 2 years. When you've heard somebody complain, when you have had complaints or concerns about things that are going on in daily life, was it microchip production? Was it infrastructure related? Oh, I mean, we're talking about food items. We're talking about gas prices. We're talking about crime. We're talking about things that affect us on a day-to-day basis. We're talking about education. And so it really is insightful. The disconnect that the elite have from the rest of us. And I genuinely believe you have these media elites and, of course, Democrats as well. They just don't understand why you don't get it. Why you don't understand that these things that Biden did shows that he is accomplished. And listen, when he was out pushing the infrastructure bill and these other pieces of legislation, the Democrats kept arguing that if he can just get those through, then people will see that he's a genuine leader. If he can just get those accomplishments under his belt, if he can just get those pieces of legislation passed, then his approval rating will go up because people will see that he is succeeding. But that is the disconnect. That success does not translate into what makes the life better for Americans. It just doesn't. On a day-to-day basis, the things that worry us, the things that keep us up at night, the things that make us wonder whether or not things will be better off for our children. Whenever you have a historic number of Americans that say we are headed in the wrong direction and we're worse off than we were 4 years ago, and historic level of people saying that we don't think that our children are going to have it as good as we do, that is not stuff that is answered by a massive infrastructure bill or a so-called Inflation Reduction Act, pouring all sorts of money into green projects and lining the pockets of donors. That doesn't do it. And they don't get that because to them that is success. So we will hear that tonight. That's going to be laid out for you as a success. We're also going to hear a lot of demonization of our fellow Americans. Be prepared. Nothing will be government's fault. Nothing will be the fault of people who are telling you how to live your lives in government. None of it at all. The fault is going to largely be you because you got to keep more of your money under the tax cuts that Republicans pushed through thanks to Trump and he signed into law. The gas prices, the inflation there, and just the constant push towards making us dependent on foreign nations for energy, specifically oil. It's going to be blamed on the oil industry. Everything is going to tell you that the enemy is your neighbor. The enemy is your church-going friend. The enemy is the small business owner. So the two major themes that we're going to hear in terms of pocketbook, in terms of the economy, one, that actually there have been a tremendous amount of accomplishments, and he'll give lip service to, there's still much more to do, see? There's still much more to do. That's why we've got to move forward. But other than that, things are fantastic because the unemployment rate, by the way that they essentially rigged the numbers, and that's nothing new with this administration. The numbers are not an accurate portrayal of actual employment, and it hasn't been for a very, very long time. But that'll be touted as this tremendous success. There'll be false claims that this is the strongest economy ever. There'll be false attributions of the deficit being slashed by Biden. It had nothing to do with Biden. And then, by the way, rich people are to blame. The oil industry is to blame. Big Pharma is to blame. All of these big corporations are to blame. And the border issue is because of Republicans, most likely. And the inflation is going to continue because of Republicans. So the future problems, they will blame on Republicans. But there will be no responsibility taken. And we will be forced to live in this sort of a fantasy land where on one hand we're told everything actually is great, but at the same time, notice how bad things are. That's your neighbor's fault. That's your mom's fault. That's your church-going friend's fault and the fault of the Republican Party. So that's what you're going to get in a nutshell tonight. Jason Ryman with the latest news update. First alert forecast, mostly cloudy with a 50% chance for rain today, only 48 for a high. Rain tonight, 44 low. Rain again tomorrow, 49, then mostly sunny Thursday, a high of 51. It's oftentimes suggested that there are always these floating around bingo games, if you will, and Sarah has created a Biden bingo for tonight. Should you want to play along? Do you want to go over some of your squares?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to go super quick. I think some of my favorite squares are Biden forgets someone's name. So, I mean, check that one off right now. Biden speaks gibberish. Look, here's the deal. And Biden squints and leans in to see. So those are just some of the things you can find on our bingo. I'll have that up at ksgf.com and on our social media if you want to play along.
Do we have Creepy Whisper on there? Is that one we forgot? Or do we get that's a good one.
So I have Joe says something creepy about women, and I have...
During the State of the Union. I laugh because...
You never know.
Well, that's just it. You never know. He could see some young, and I'm serious about this, being Joe Biden, if there's some 12-year-old girl in the alley, because, you get these different people that are invited to attend State of the Unions. And if there happens to be a family with some 12-year-old girl or some adult woman, and Joe Biden has done this before, where he remembers when she was 12 and talks about that. So it's, as much as we laugh about it, and it seemingly seems as if we're trying to make a point as to what a pedo pervert that he appears to be, it isn't outside the realm of
It
possibility
could
that he'll do
happen.
that.
Yeah.
That he will do that. You could do the whisper. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe
there could
I'll
be a
have to switch one of
combination.
those
Like, look
out.
at this. I got three all in one. Good old Joe.
Oh, man.
Speaker McCarthy has already. This is a relatively new thing. I think it's come up in the last several years. There's always and I just don't ever really think they're that effective, but I understand why they're done. After the president gives his State of the Union, then there is the rebuttal. Sarah Huckabee Sanders is going to be giving that rebuttal. But then there's sort of a pre-rebuttal that developed a few years ago. It's trying to preempt some of the accusations. And one of again, this is so exceedingly frustrating because while Republicans don't always have the right answer, clearly, when you're dealing with Democrats, we can't even have conversations about things in which there really, truly, desperately needs to be conversations because they just lie about everything. Like, they're running around, of course, claiming that on top of all the taxes that already exist, Republicans want to put an additional 30% sales tax on everything, which, of course, is not true. There has been talk about you eliminate all other taxes, and then 23% is largely a number that is utilized. Of course, it's not going to happen for a number of reasons, at least in the short time. But, they throw that out there, and then people believe it, even if it were true in that limited presentation that's given. These are things that should be talked about. I mean, it's just amazing to me. Biden was, I think, in Pennsylvania in the last couple of days, and he's test running this, talking about how radical Republicans want to eliminate the IRS. And, I mean, only can a brainwashed mass boo that. But you have Democrats that now act like the IRS is this one. I mean, when did this happen? Democrats act like the IRS, it's their church. It's the greatest thing ever. How could anybody ever talk? How could we ever live without it? As if it is fundamental to the foundation of this country. And then when there's any discussion or talk about fixing the tax code, I mean, our tax code, I don't know that there's much that is as jacked up as our tax code. And we know this. Every tax season, you'll have this experiment that's done in order to prove a point that's obvious. And they'll give the same tax return situation to 10 or 50 different tax people, and you get 10 or 50 different results because it's so complicated and so confusing. We can't even talk about fixing that. The mere idea of fixing it, all Joe Biden has to do is mention that, and then Democrat voters, you boo that idea? Are you out of your minds? I mean, fine, if you don't want to eliminate it, if it's so sacred to you, the IRS is an institution that must stay intact so it can chase down, which, by the way, under the Biden administration, people making $20,000 or less a year, 5 times more likely than anyone else to get audited. So there's your really going after the rich. I mean, that to you is some sort of sacred relationship that needs to continue to exist. Fine, but we can't at least talk about simplifying the thing. We're going to take a break in just a couple of things that McCarthy noted. Also, Biden's going to propose a billionaire minimum tax, which will do absolutely nothing beneficial. But I do want to go over some numbers. It sounds boring. It's not boring. But numbers because, as I mentioned, we'll hear that part of the deficit was created by the tax cuts, our tax cuts signed into law by Trump. But that has been proven, as we knew that it would, to be absolutely false. False. It made the government tons of money. But as usual with the left, it's more about power and control than it is even having your money. Springfield's Talk 104.1. I'm Nick Reed. Speaker McCarthy yesterday in a pre-State of the Union address speech blasted Biden and Democrats, noting that our national debt is high, too high. The problem is getting worse, not better. We're now $31 trillion in debt, more than the size of the entire American economy. And one of the things that I think Republicans need to do is mea culpa on this, say, we've been part of this problem. Because Republicans have been part of this problem for some time. It has been a very, very, very long time. Perhaps since the 90s, that in any really, truly meaningful way, Republicans have made that an issue that they work towards. And at some point, you lose credibility. I mean, frankly, they've lost credibility with me when it comes to this issue, and I'm to the point now. All right, we'll prove it. He notes accurately that our debt is now a greater burden than it has been at any time since World War II, noting if we continue down the path in the next 10 years, we'll spend over $8 trillion just on interest, which is more than the entire federal budget this year by a lot. And the problem is with these numbers, they're incomprehensible to the average person. They are just numbers. And the people in Washington that want to continue to spend recklessly, destroying the economic future of this country, they know that. And their betting is that they'll be dead and gone by time this becomes so insufferable that we see a full collapse in this country. And even if it does happen before that, they know what happens in any country in which the people in charge collapse it. They are still taken care of. They still have their money. They still have their relationships. They still have their doctor's appointments. They still have their electricity. So they don't worry in the same way that we do. He noted in 2021, Democrats passed the largest debt limit increase in American history. They maxed out our nation's credit cards, again, just 13 months later. Now Biden wants Congress to raise the debt limit again without a single sensible change to how government spends your hard-earned money. None. McCarthy said that defaulting on the nation's debt was not an option, but neither is a future of higher taxes, higher interest rates, and an economy that doesn't work for working Americans. Incidentally, another one of the arguments, and listen, Republicans do have a dishonest media working against them. And as always, you will have a significant portion of the population who is lied to about plans for Social Security. And despite the fact that McCarthy has been saying, and he said it yesterday, listen, that cuts to Social Security are off the table. It will not stop Democrats in the media from falsely saying that Republicans want to cut Social Security. They have said that as long as I can remember. Now, something does need to be done with Social Security in just about a decade. It will not be solvent, and this fantasy land of pretending everything is going to be okay is going to come crashing down in some capacity. And Democrats, they aren't worried about it because they frankly don't really care about you. And Republicans, most of them are afraid of losing support because they know that Democrats will capitalize off what is needed here, and that is some sort of alteration in Social Security, because it's totally irresponsible the way that we're dealing with this now for a number of reasons. You have less people paying in than you have actually taking. People were not even, in terms of life expectancy, expected to live long enough to get Social Security, and now a decade passed, so you have all of these people. Everybody's in it. The formula is a sort of formula. Frankly, if a private business was set up this way, the person who was running it would go to prison. It's called a pyramid scheme. It's a true, genuine form of pyramid scheme. Just give us money, invest money, get in now, and in the end, you're going to get all this money back. It's a pyramid scheme. But because it's the government, they're able to sell it to us. Twitter flagged Biden tweet accusing GOP of wanting to cut Social Security and Medicare. So fact-checking Biden on that. Biden to propose the billionaire minimum tax. While the White House is not elaborating on specifics about the proposed tax, a previous proposal that was considered would have altered the tax system by imposing a 23.8% annual tax on all the gains on billionaires' assets in a given year, including unrealized capital gains, which is one of the most dishonest and immoral taxes that there are. Many people don't even know that it's legal, if it's legal. This is essentially saying if you got stock, like what do? You get your 401k, you have your mutual funds, you have these things, and you want it to go up in value, right? Because you're thinking, I'm going to retire in 20 years. Well, what unrealized gains is saying, it went up last year, your value went up, so that means it is valued more, so we're going to tax you on that value, even though you haven't cashed it out. Now, you're thinking to yourself, well, there's no way Americans will go for this. Well, they will, because it's only going to be put on billionaires, see? So what you do when it comes to extorting new revenue, as immoral as the way that they want to do it may be, and you just pick a demonized segment of the population. This isn't anything new. It's not any brilliant tactic. We have seen this sort of evil occur where you have government tell one group of people, oh, no, don't worry, they're the bad ones over there. We're going to punish them. And people are like, oh, all right. We talked about this earlier in the week, that whole poem, they came for the communists, I said nothing because I wasn't a communist. Well, they came for the billionaires, I said nothing because I wasn't a billionaire. It's the same tactic. I want to read to you a piece that summarizes some Congressional Budget Office numbers that I talked about. I know that sounds like it's going to be boring, but it's not. And it's actually written by Alfredo Ortiz. He's the president and CEO of the Job Creators Network, and we had him as author of the week a few weeks ago. His book, The Real Race Revolutionaries, How Minority Entrepreneurship Can Overcome America's Radical and Economic Divides. And one of, I'm sure, the themes you're going to hear tonight is the lie that it was your tax cut, the fact that you're keeping more of your money, that has created this deficit that Biden has managed to get under control to some degree. That is not true. The deficit is actually less than it would be because of your tax cuts. It's smaller. Springfield's Talk 104.1, I'm Nick Reed. For traffic, the American Transmissions Talk and Text line regarding the Democrats and their love for the IRS. If you take the IRS away from the Democrats, it's like trying to take guns away from Americans because the Democrats have weaponized it to the highest extent, using it on conservative Tea Party members, so on. What if we come up with IRS control laws? Wonder how they would like that. Answer is they would not. Here's traffic. I'm Nick Reed. First alert forecast sponsored by Navant. Employee benefits that work mostly cloudy with a 50% chance of rain tonight, or today rather, with a high of 48. Rain tonight, 40. Rain tomorrow, 49. Mostly sunny, 51 on Thursday. When recently questioned by reporters outside the U.S. Capitol about the ongoing debt ceiling fight, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez remarked, "The largest contributor to our deficit has been the Trump tax cuts." Now, this is as big of a lie as one can possibly tell. The reason being is that the tax cuts, which, again, I don't like calling them the Trump tax cuts, though he does deserve credit. But I believe it takes away from the real true purpose, and that is allowing Americans to keep more of their money. They are our tax cuts. And they're our tax cuts. Our income that Democrats want to take more of. But the fact of the matter is, and this is consistent anytime it's been done, and it has proven to be true once again. Tax cuts bring more revenue, not less. You see, deficits aren't just a matter of revenue, but it's also a amount of spending. Anyone who does a budget understands this. So you can get a huge pay raise and still increase deficits if you go out and recklessly spend, and that's what the government does. Now, this piece I'm going to read for you, it's actually from a past author of the week that we had, Alfredo Ortiz. He's the president and CEO of the Job Creation Network. And he also, this is the author of the week. ABC Books always, of course, sponsors our author of the week. His book, was The Real Race Revolutionaries, How Minority Entrepreneurship Can Overcome America's Racial and Economic Divides. And he writes, it's an intellectually talking about the claim that the tax cuts are a contributor to the deficit. He notes it's an intellectually bankrupt argument that has been parroted by left-wing politicians and talking heads since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was debated and passed in 2017. Fortunately, the facts have finally caught up with the tax cuts detractors, while supporters have been vindicated. A new report from the Congressional Budget Office proves that. On top of the tax cuts contributing to one of the strongest economies in half a century pre-pandemic, the package did not compromise the federal budget. The CBO data shows the government actually collected a record $4.9 trillion in revenue last year, nearly $500 billion more dollars than had been projected. The uptick in government collections was experienced across the board. Receipts from corporate and individual income taxes surpassed expectations by about 25% and 11% respectively. Now, what should not get ignored here is the fact that when corporate taxes are cut, corporations also pay more taxes. But how does that work? Because they have more money, they are able to become greater producers, and the more that you produce and sell of your goods and services, the more revenue you bring in. By the way, this is what is referred to as trickle-down economics. People like that nut job Claire McCaskill that still evidently has a job at MSNBC, and Joe Biden and others, they mock trickle-down economics. That's what we're talking about here. In 2022, it wasn't a fluke. Federal reserves, or revenue rather, is up a total of roughly $1.5 trillion since 2018, or about 40% since the tax cuts went into effect that same year. An increase in revenue by 40%. Translation: instead of tax cuts costing $1 trillion as the Joint Committee on Taxation originally predicted, tax receipts have soared. Now, this is important to explain because it can be confusing, and I understand many of you know this. But there are a lot of people that don't understand this because it doesn't get explained, and to some degree this is a fault of Republicans for not doing a very good job of explaining it. Whenever you have the Congressional Budget Office, whenever you have the Joint Committee on Taxation come up with numbers, they come up with numbers in a vacuum. In other words, if I am on this committee, I'm with the Congressional Budget Office, and I am told there is going to be a tax cut, an income tax cut across the board down to 10%. What I do then is I directly do the math and say, okay, well, this over here, they were paying this much, they were paying this much. Now, if it's lowered to this much, what does that mean? Instead of in that circumstance, that taxpayer paying this much, they're going to pay this much, and it's less. And then they come up with a figure, and they're like, it's going to be $1 trillion less. But what they don't account for is the economic boom that comes from that. You see, that's $1 trillion. Here's what you have to understand. When they say, well, there's $1 trillion deficit that's going to cost, that's $1 trillion that's going to go into the private economy. And in the private economy, it duplicates. Think about this for a moment and the absurdity. What is it that Democrats and Republicans agree upon when it comes to the need to, quote, stimulate the economy? Look at COVID relief. What do? They start giving checks to people. Why do they start giving checks to people? Because then they go out and spend that money, and that helps the economy. So they acknowledge that people having more money is good for the economy. Unless it's money that you actually earn yourself, then they claim it's not good. It's somehow going to cause a deficit. Now, I don't want to get too far off the beaten path here, but there is a massive difference in stimulus checks and getting money into the private sector because government's writing checks versus people keeping their own money. Because when government is just printing money and pumping it out, you get inflation because that money is not earned. Earned money is the good money. Printed money that is just handed out is not. That causes inflation. And this is why when we had these massive tax cuts, the rate of inflation, despite another lie told by Joe Biden just earlier, just a couple days ago when he was asked if he takes any responsibility for inflation, and he said no because it was there when I became president. It was like 1.2, 1.4%. It was in the low end of normal because there's always a very tiny a bit of inflation that is in there. So with the tax cuts, you had a 40% increase of revenue coming in. You had a stimulated economy and inflation on the low end of normal. The increased government revenue is not in spite of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but because of it. As my organization, the Job Creation Network, has been arguing all along, the legislation created a small business boom by helping entrepreneurs compete on an even playing field with the big business competitors. Provisions like the 20% tax deduction and immediate expensing helped small businesses keep more of their own money and encouraged investment. That meant hiring more employees. It meant raising wages. It meant providing more generous staff benefits and upgrading facilities. These are all things that Democrats demonize. Multiply these actions across the nation's 30 million small businesses, and the U.S. economic pie grew by so much that the tax cuts more than paid for themselves. Beyond broad economic progress, the package helped bridge racial economic divides because the legislation had an outsized positive impact on minority communities. In 2019, real median income increased by 7.9% for black households, 7.1% for Hispanics, and 10.6% for Asians, representing record increases in each case for the minority classes. By the way, we can thank Biden's inflation for wiping all of that out. Whose policies really help the poor and minorities? Armed with the undeniable economic benefits triggered by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, in addition to findings from the latest CBO report, there is no intellectually honest reason not to make elements of the law permanent. This is what a lot of people don't know. It's going to go back to the way it was. Ortiz notes, if it's going to happen, policymakers have to act fast. Provisions of the legislation are set to expire in 2025, which leaves lawmakers with little time to act before entrepreneurs begin to slow investments to prepare for the 2025 cliff that will effectively be a hit or a tax hike on Main Street. Extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is a political uniter that lawmakers of all political persuasions should be able to rally behind. Maybe Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez can even be persuaded. After all, it could help businesses in her district claw back at least some of the 25,000 good-paying Amazon jobs she chased away in 2019. Traffic update, I'm Nick Reed. All our building company, you may be one of those folks that do not like to remodel. You don't want to repaint. You don't want to pick out new colors. You don't want to do any of that. With Aller Building Company, you don't have to. They're about to do their official grand opening of their brand new showroom floor, and that's where you get to do the fun part is they build the new home, and you pick what makes it your home. So when you turn that key, day one, you go in, it is exactly the way you want it. Aller Building Company, Oller. One of the observations I've been making for some time is the Republican Party needs to start becoming vocal about the fact the Chamber of Commerce is not what the Chamber of Commerce says it is. While the Chamber of Commerce may try and market itself as being, pro-business, lower taxes, smaller government, they spend resources. They have spent resources helping Democrats retain power. This was most notable when they threw money support behind Democrats during not the most recent, but 2 years prior to that, when Democrats barely hung on to control. And I believe there were 23, there were a number of very vulnerable Democrats that the chamber threw their money and support behind, and enough of them won that it kept Nancy Pelosi in power for another 2 years. Now, the chamber, when they get exposed for doing this, they claim, well, we thought that if we funded their campaigns that they would side with Republicans and smaller government. That's BS. No one's that naive. And if they are, they should not be in a position that gives them authority over an organization that is supposed to be pro-business. Breitbart has a story. McCarthy Scalise refused U.S. Chamber of Commerce for backing Democrats. And they're calling them out, and this needs to happen. Now, I'm not one of these people that believes that you should just refuse to have conversations with people because they don't do what you want. But the problem too long has been the chamber and their ability to use the relationship with Republicans to masquerade themselves as something that they're not. And Republicans have for too long not wanted to come out against the chamber. This is definitely a step in the right direction with McCarthy and Scalise, because people need to know this. Businesses need to know this, because there are a lot of businesses who write a check. They're already having a difficult enough time. And they face increased taxes, increased regulations, the taxation through inflation that the Democrats put through, which, by the way, that could not have happened. Well, it could have, but it would not have happened had Nancy Pelosi not had that last 2 years as Speaker, thanks to, arguably, the chamber. And on top of that, they're writing checks to this organization that they believe is out there looking for their best interest. Speaker of the House McCarthy, House Majority Leader Scalise, both have refused to meet with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce due to the organization's endorsement of Democrats. And it's more than just the endorsements. It is the meaningful results that they have obtained to the detriment of America. In a statement to CNBC on Monday, Mark Bednar, a chief spokesman for McCarthy, said the priorities of the organization no longer align with the Republican Party. Quote, the priorities of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce have not aligned with the priorities of the House Republicans or the interests of their own members, and they should not expect a meeting with Speaker McCarthy as long as that's the case. Lauren Fine, spokeswoman for Steve Scalise, reiterated the same sentiment, noting Washington has radically shifted away from the pro-business philosophy of most local chambers across the country. Unless the chamber gets back to their traditional pro-business roots, they should not expect to have any engagement with Majority Leader Scalise's office. According to CNBC, House Republicans may investigate the chamber and have begun drafting questions to ask regarding its stance on the Biden administration's push for ESG. Yes, the ESG that is already doing a tremendous amount of damage in this country, is something that apparently the chamber is a little friendly with, the idea of, at least. We'll talk about that coming up also. There's something afoot. Um, it is becoming more and more clear there is an effort to get Kamala Harris out of any equation regarding the presidency, whether it is Joe Biden running for re-election and Kamala being his running mate, or Joe Biden not running and the default being the vice president, clearly trying to just eliminate her from the possibility. Even there, you're getting all sorts of leaks. There's a story Hillary Clinton is out there telling people Kamala doesn't have what it takes. You have now these reports leaking out in a New York Times story that Kamala Harris has been hiding for over a year from the media because she's such a disaster and she knows it. So they are out to destroy her. It's a little fun to watch, I suppose. Springfield's Talk 104.1. I'm Nick Reed. All right, more in moments. News in 60 seconds. I'm Nick Reed. A1 Custom Car Care, all of your car care needs. Maybe it's a big need, it's a small need, it's a need in between, whatever it is. 3 area locations for, going on 12, 13 years I've been taking my vehicles and recommending others do the same too. A1 Custom Car Care. Their location info under Nick's endorsements, ksgf.com. The slow but necessary breakup has become a little more prevalent between Republican, at least leadership, and the Chamber of Commerce. And listen, relationships change over time. People go their different directions. And the Chamber of Commerce has put a lot of effort into helping make sure that at times Democrats remained in power. And the last 2 years in which Democrats retained power and did some very damaging things to this country and to small businesses, they had the help of the Chamber of Commerce. And you got McCarthy and Scalise through their spokespersons now noting, listen, they're just not. There's no point in meeting with them any longer. Their values do not align with the party, with the House Republicans, and so there's just really no point in meeting with them. In addition to that, according to CNBC, House Republicans may investigate the chamber and have begun drafting questions to ask regarding its stance on the Biden administration's push for environmental regulations in the name of climate change. CNBC reporting McCarthy's refusal to meet with the chamber is the latest strike in an ongoing feud between some House Republican members and the Chamber of Commerce. The Intercept reported that House Republicans plan to investigate the chamber as GOP lawmakers take on anyone who supports Joe Biden's push for more environmental, social, and governance regulations known as ESG. The Daily Caller reported that the chamber plans to sue the Securities and Exchange Commission if it goes forward with a climate change-related disclosure rule, but many report that the chamber does. This is the aggravation expressed by a lot of Republicans, that the chamber does a lot of things for show on the surface that they can utilize to portray themselves as being pro-business, but then when push comes to shove and when it really matters, they're not there. The CNBC report continued, Republican House lawmakers are drafting questions to send the chamber in the coming weeks, asking about its stance on ESG issues, as well as questioning some of the chamber's own conduct, including the reportedly allowing former chamber CEO Thomas Donahue use the trade group's corporate jet for personal trips. According to lawmakers and advisors aiming to probe the organization, these people declined to be named in order to speak freely about private discussions. Kevin McCarthy told Breitbart News in January of last year that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce would no longer be welcomed in the Republican Party if it continued to endorse Democrats and back big business at the expense of Americans. Quote, the chamber left the party a long time ago, he said. In the last election, the chamber supported Democrats. The chamber gave a higher score to Democrats who were voting for this policy because they signed some letter, then voted the opposite of what the letter said, than Kevin Brady, who was chair of Ways and Means and brought us the tax cuts. I just assume they have as much influence in the future as they do now. None, he added, are responsibilities to the American public. That is who's going to drive it. If special interests are the American public, then they'll have a say, but it's the American public we're going to. The chamber also backed several Democrats over Republicans during the 2020 congressional elections, working to preserve the Democrat majority. Quote, had Republicans flipped just a handful of more seats, they flipped a net 15 from Democrats in 2020. They would have had the majority instead of the Democrats right now. This is what McCarthy noted last year. The chamber, which endorsed 23 House Democrats in 2020, may have made the difference in helping keep the Democrats in the majority, as some of the members the new business group endorsed survived tight re-election races. Tim Doyle, a spokesman for the Chamber of Commerce, told CNBC that the group has no partisan leaning and endorsed policies in line with the Republicans, claiming the chamber's priorities include lower taxes, reduced spending, fighting overregulation, and numerous other issues, and we are aligned with House Republicans on many of the issues that are important to American businesses of all sizes. We do disagree with those who believe the chamber should become a single-party partisan organization, and we recognize the difference, or that difference has created some tension. We will continue, however, to do what we have done for over 110 years, and that is advise the free market priorities of the American business community. The Democrat Party in no way, shape, or form is free market. And there are some big government Republicans that aren't either. And it's fine to have sort of this virtue signaling of, well, we're not here to be partisan and support one party. But if you claim you are for free market priorities, you claim that you are for lower taxes, you claim you are for less regulations for businesses, but then you vote for people and funnel money to people who are against the opposite, you're dishonest. It's the difference between walking the walk and talking the talk. And it's long past due, but definitely better late than never, that the Republicans are standing up to some degree and calling it as it is. Jason Rima with the latest news. First alert forecast, it is going to be a cloudy day with a 50% chance for rain, high of 48. Rain tonight, 44 low. Rain, windy tomorrow, 49, then mostly sunny on Thursday with a high of 51. The knives are out. It's becoming more and more apparent that there is a deliberate effort to get Kamala Harris out of any equation possible. They just, talking about Democrats, want her gone. And increasingly, there have been all of these stories that leak out about what a nightmare she is to work for, about what a disappointment she is to Democrats, about how she's had, over 2 years now to get her stride, and she's failed to do so. And now there are certain names in particular. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton reportedly voiced concerns about Kamala Harris. So there could be a couple of reasons that this is occurring, because you try to read, okay, how does this fit in? What is the equation here? Is this to benefit Biden, or is this to harm Biden? Or is this is this a chess game? We're going to get rid of Biden, but that leaves Kamala in the wings, so we've got to get rid of her as well. Coordinated sort of effort here. All that coming up here in just a couple of moments. American Transmissions, talk and text line 447-KSGF. And don't forget, Friday, we have the Friday Road Show at Scramblers, sponsored by Affordable Towing. And Sarah Myers.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I would like to read a review from my friends over at the Pyramid Roofing Company. Zach wrote, Josh and Landon were phenomenal. They inspected my roof and were honest with their opinions, and they even gave great advice. Nothing was forced and no scare tactics were used. They are very knowledgeable. Highly recommend. And I can say the same thing for the Pyramid Roofing Company. Whenever I had the Pyramid Roofing team come out to my house, we had kind of the worst case scenario, and we knew that going forward with it. And the Pyramid Roofing team, they did a really great job explaining everything to us. They didn't try to make us feel like bad homeowners. They didn't try to upsell us or scare us. They just told us how it was, and these were the things that they recommended. These are the products that they recommended, and they got the job done within just a matter of days. So if that's the type of company that you're looking for, highly recommend my friends over at the Pyramid Roofing Company. Now you can find all of their contact information housed at ksgf.com under the Sarah's Endorsements tab.
I want to address one of the texts that came in before we get to the Kamala Harris stuff here, and it regards donations to candidates. And this is a theme that comes up often, and every so often it is something I explain my perspective on, which runs counter to what many people oftentimes would think. And so the text message says political donations from corporations or PACs should be eliminated with a $100 maximum from individual donors. Would that not cut out a lot of the corruption? Well, the short answer to that is no, it would not. And arguably, it would actually increase corruption. Now, creating new restrictions on donations to elected officials and the belief, though I understand it, but the belief that that is going to stop bad people from doing bad things is similar to believing that gun control laws, restricting putting new regulations on guns is going to stop bad people from doing bad things with guns. What happens is good people stop participating in the process while people who don't really worry about rules still participate. The money isn't the issue in politics. It's the fact that something's for sale. Government officials have too much to sell, and that is power. They should not have the amount of power that they have. We live in a time in which government can just completely destroy an industry. They can also artificially prop it up. It's one of the income tax is one of the forms of taxation that allows for some of the most manipulation possible. You have an industry and they write you checks for all this money, and then the elected officials turn around and, we'll give you tax credits. People tax credits if they purchase your product. Now, some people will say, well, that's why you should get the money out. Then they won't do those things. The money will be there, whether it's seen or not, whether it's over the table or under the table. Do we honestly believe that corrupt politicians, again, equate it to gun control laws, that if we have a law in place telling a corrupt politician you can no longer take money from a corporation, that they're no longer going to take money from a corporation? They will. It'll just be illegally. The other downside in limiting donations, if you notice the perspective, is always limiting not how much they can take, but how much we can give. So in other words, there's a limit of $2,400 per candidate that a person can write a check for. And that doesn't say that the candidate can only raise $1 million per cycle and that's it. It tells us how much we can give. Now, I'll tell you something else. I'm making this relatively short. The greater the restriction on dollars, the greater protection there is for incumbents. If you were to say, for example, corporations cannot make donations and the maximum amount a person can give is $100, what chance do you think a normal citizen who isn't a connected person independently wealthy has at taking on an incumbent. Do we really believe that politicians pass campaign finance laws that are going to make it easier to unseat them? Of course not. They're not going to pass any restriction on campaign donations that are going to make it more difficult for them to run for re-election. Any one of those laws that it helps them. They have the unlimited resources of going on television, of sending out taxpayer updates, which is perfectly legal, and I get that. I mean, I don't have a problem with elected officials, you know, it being, quote, paid for by us for them to communicate, here are the things that I'm doing. Some may argue with that, but that's not where, my beef is. How else are we really supposed to know? And in the electronic age, things are differently. But that aside, if you are an elected official and you want to do a ribbon cutting somewhere, you're an elected official and you want to get invited to some event, I mean, you have built-in support. And the more restrictions we put on the amount of money that people can donate and that people can, provide to, you just forget about the newcomers running. I mean, it's all going to be incumbents. But I'm telling you, ultimately, it isn't the money. It's what is for sale. That's the problem. Just like the problem with drugs isn't the fact that it costs money. It's that it's what the people who are spending the money buy. Look at Hunter Biden. Is the problem with Hunter Biden art and that you can spend as much money as you want on art? No, it's what he's selling, and that's access. And it's the same with dollars and donations, whether it's a corporation or an individual. And when it does come to corporations, oftentimes, sometimes it's defensive spending. We think that these corporations, we always think of them, we view it through the lens of evil because that's how they're generally portrayed in the media. And that is that they're trying to buy favors. Many times it's not different than paying the mafia. You're buying protection. You know that they can destroy you. You know that with some new regulation or some new legislation or canceling some sort of contract, they can put you and the hundreds or perhaps thousands of employees out of business, out on the street, and you're desperate not to have the full force of the government come down and do that. I mean, look at what Biden did with the Keystone Pipeline, for example. Look at all of those people that lost their jobs just with the stroke of a pen. I mean, he did that on day one. All those people's lives turned upside down. So oftentimes you do have these industries, and that's why you see that they write checks to everybody, write them to Democrats and Republicans. They're buying protection. The money's not the problem. It's what they're buying, the existence of what they're buying. Our government has too much power. And that's the root of the problem. Springfield's Talk 104.1, I'm Nick Reed. Don Carricker, I want a great homeloan.com. It's a great resource. Bookmark it, keep it, don't forget it. Of course, there is always Nick's endorsement page at ksgf.com. Any sort of questions you may have in the interest rate situation, saying interest rates, maybe they go up, they go down, and now we're talking about home prices. Some are saying, they're going to go down drastically. You see these headlines. The one person who predicted the housing crisis so many years ago now says this. And then you click on it, and he says that home prices are going to go down by 15%, whatever. Just don't believe any of that stuff. I'm not saying that it isn't true, but I'm just saying that every person's situation is going to be a bit different. And oftentimes, it's clickbait. Even news outlets do clickbait. They want you to click. What did the one guy say? I must know this. He was right before. That must mean he's never wrong. And so you click on it and you think, well, maybe I'll wait. Just talk with Don Carricker and his team, Alex and Anthony Carricker. Any questions you may have about should I be buying a home right now? Should I be buying a home for investment or a duplex? I want a great homeloan.com because you do. The target is on Kamala Harris. Democrats, by all appearances here, want her just off the landscape, want her gone. Just the news reporting that former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has reportedly voiced concerns that Vice President Kamala Harris doesn't have what it takes to win a party primary. Well, she never even made it to the first contest last time around. And, of course, she said it's because in their Democrat primary system that Democrat voters are racist and misogynistic, and that's why it was she had to drop out. So it's not necessarily the most brilliant observation coming from Hillary Clinton, given that she couldn't even make it to Iowa, that being Kamala Harris. The New York Times cited anonymous Democrats, plural, who had conversed with Hillary Clinton, recalling her private opinions that Harris could not navigate a primary contest. A spokesperson for Clinton told the outlet that the pair enjoyed a close relationship and that the former First Lady was supportive of the vice president. Harris currently has an overall favorability rating of only 38%. 51.8% disapprove of her performance. Now, there could be a number of reasons for this. It is perhaps noteworthy that the criticism of Kamala Harris is about navigating the primary process. What does this mean? Is this prepping for Biden not running for re-election? Or is this prepping for Biden is going to run for re-election, but he needs to drop Kamala Harris because she is not going to be the answer 4 years from now if Biden does happen to win a second term? There's more in this with the New York Times piece and criticisms of Kamala, but one thing is clear. They want her gone. They don't want that in the equation, because that is a question that keeps coming up. Will it be Kamala? If Biden runs for re-election, will he have her run on the ticket again? If he doesn't run, is she going to be the one who runs for what's going to happen? And they don't want that to be a discussion point any longer. Here's a traffic update. There's certain improvements you can make to your home that you can try yourself. And if it doesn't work out, then hiring somebody else isn't going to be the the biggest deal in the world. It's not the most difficult thing to undo. But then there are certain projects you do not want to hire cheap. You just don't. If you're going to spend any money at all, you're going to be spending good money. But spending good money and then a little more to get it done right is very, very, very important. And when it comes to your garage, when it comes to what many of you've seen, the beautiful high-end looking epoxy flooring with all the little flakes in it and everything, you think of it as a showroom floor for somebody that has a bunch of real expensive old cars or something. But then you see, well, I can do it myself. I saw a kid at the local store, or I know a guy who does that. He does a lot of things, and that happens to be the one thing, one of the many things that he does. Garage experts, this is what they do, and I'm telling you, if you're thinking about having it done, don't try to find the cheapest out there. And if you want it done right, don't try to do it yourself. Garage experts, under Nick's endorsements, ksgf.com. You can go to my Facebook page, 1041 Nick Reed, and see the transformation they did. In fact, I just posted, because it's been almost a year, I was looking at photos and posted some of the photos of the job that they did, not with the customized storage, but the flooring itself. You can see those on my Facebook page, 1041 Nick Reed. Mostly cloudy today with a 50% chance of rain. High of 48, rain 44 low tonight, rain 49 tomorrow, mostly sunny Thursday with a high of 51. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton voicing concerns Vice President Kamala Harris does not have the necessary political acumen to win a party primary. There's a Fox News piece. Democrats admit they've lost hope in Kamala Harris. Quote, can't think of one thing she's done. Democrats leaking their disdain for Vice President Kamala Harris to the press, with a few political bigwigs arguing openly that Harris is a major liability in 2024. New York Times headline in an article yesterday, Harris struggling to define her vice presidency. Even her allies are tired of waiting. Well, for Pete's sakes, we're into the third year of it. How much time does the woman need? Listen, I understand. To a degree, there's going to be a learning curve. But there are certain leadership attributes that if 2.5 years or 2 years plus going into the job, you ain't there, it's not going to happen. It's not happening. Fox News reporting that's because one of the few issues that some Democrats are in agreement on, whether they're allies of the vice president or not, is that she's a disappointment at best, according to the New York Times. It's got to make you. As a human being, I'm sure she's earned this. But man, can you imagine? Have you ever had a job where people openly talk about how bad you are at it? But imagine now you're the vice president of the United States and everyone is looking at you and there are news reports about just how awful you are at your job. That is a gut check that most people will never experience. And if you read the signals that come from such high turnover in her office, one would think that she would have recognized some time ago that there's a problem, but she clearly is in denial. You wonder, however, if it happens on a national stage, is there some self-reflection? Is there some accountability? She is a leftist after all, so the answer, I suppose, is no. These people, nothing is ever their fault. The world is sexist, it's racist, misogynistic. She is complaining that Joe Biden has given her too many responsibilities. She has to learn to say no. So there is no self-reflection here. According to the New York Times, the painful reality for Ms. Harris is that in private conversations over the last few months, dozens of Democrats in the White House, on Capitol Hill, and around the nation, including some who helped put her on the party's 2020 ticket, said she had not risen to the challenge of proving herself as a future leader of the party, much less the country. Even some Democrats who were supposed to be supporters of Harris confided privately that they've lost hope in her. Democratic fundraiser John Morgan was one of the few voices to speak out on the record against Harris, arguing that her weakness as vice president will be one of the most hard-hitting arguments against Biden. Man, that's how you know you're real bad. You look at all of the wake behind Biden, the disasters, and people see you as what? Not Afghanistan. Think about that in comparison for a moment. You have mega donors of your party that say, oh, of all the arguments against Biden, it's not going to be the border, not inflation, not Afghanistan. No. Kamala Harris is worse than any of those things. Morgan, the fundraiser, notes, the argument only becomes stronger because of the president's age. It doesn't take a genius to say, look, with his age, we have to really think about this. The Democrat fundraiser also took aim at Harris's record of achievement as vice president, saying, I can't think of one thing she's done except stay out of the way and stand behind him at certain ceremonies. Multiple polls reflect unpopularity and so forth, and she's gained a reputation for flubbing speeches and talking like a 5-year-old wrote her speeches. Now, some of these things can be overthought. You can overanalyze. You can look at it and say, all right, on one hand, they fear that okay, Biden is going to run again. We want Biden in there again, but we can't undo Afghanistan. We can't undo the border. We can't undo inflation. All of these things we cannot undo, but we can undo her. We can get somebody on there like Pete Buttigieg, who's also a tremendous failure, but he's got a great label, just like Kamala did, and that's generally what Democrats go for. They don't go for the book and the content of the book, but instead the cover, and you were supposed to judge the book by its cover, and this is oftentimes what you get. And so let's just, get her out of the way so that Biden can get reelected and she won't pull him down. This could be a recognition that or there's an attempt to get Biden out of the way, that despite his determination publicly that he is going to run for reelection, that there is still going to be an effort to force him not to do that, to make him a candidate that is too weak to be viable. But Kamala is vice president, and so there's sort of this default mechanism in the minds of voters that, all right, whomever the vice president is, that's the person who's next in line, and we've got to take that out of the equation. We're tired of people talking about it, so we've got to get the message out there to Democrat voters that we don't like her. Hillary Clinton doesn't like her. Fundraisers don't like her. She's a huge failure. Nobody likes her. She can't do anything that anybody can point to that says it's anything worthwhile. All she is a drag on the party. So we've got to make sure she's not part of the equation. I don't know which it is. It may simply be the powers that be in the Democrat Party not necessarily knowing which direction things are going to go. Is Biden going to run again? Is he not going to run again? Are we going to be able to get him out? All they know is that there is not a single equation in which Kamala Harris is anything other than an albatross. And there's not a single equation. There's not a single choose-your-own-adventure outcome in which Democrats say, oh, it's a good idea actually to keep Kamala Harris around, so they're trying to eliminate her. Springfield's Talk 104.1, I'm Nick Reed. Couple text messages on the American Transmissions talk and text line. The only thing I can remember about Kamala is the yellow school bus, that 2.5-minute rant she made. Like, seriously, what does she even do? Another saying, good morning, Nick. Regardless of the desire for the next president to be a beacon of social justice, it is no excuse for tokenism. Harris is a result of tokenism. So here's such an obvious situation here with Kamala, and it's almost weird that this seemingly is unexpected territory. Kamala Harris was chosen because of her gender and her race. I mean, Biden said that he was going to pick a woman regardless. And it wasn't necessarily a promise, but you had some saying he'd better choose a woman of color. And so I think we boiled it down. It's like 6% of the population in the United States. So you eliminate 94% of the population. And then, okay, so you have 6% of the population, but clearly only there's a small portion that is viable in terms of the public eye, right? Stacey Abrams continued to be a complete joke. They floated a few other names, but they were all nut jobs. And so Kamala Harris was the only other one left. He painted himself into a corner and ended up picking someone because he described what she looked like and said, I'm going to pick a person who looks like this. I'm going to pick a person who has these body parts and this skin color. You think about it. At that particular time, I mean, Tulsi Gabbard clearly was not an option for them, given that they had, or at least Hillary Clinton and others deemed her a Russian asset. Kamala couldn't even make it to the first primaries, but she, in terms of failure, she was less a failure than the others. Stacey Abrams, they were still a little bit up in the air about, and they kind of, they wanted to see her in Georgia, and I think they recognized that they thought that she could have another run at it and win the governorship there, and so she ended up, not being tapped, and there just was no other person. Well, when you pick somebody and their merits are irrelevant to you, when you are picking somebody for a job that does take a certain level of skill set, and skill set is irrelevant to you, you should not be surprised whenever they turn out to not be able to do the job. Pete Buttigieg is another example of this. If Pete Buttigieg were a heterosexual, no one would even know his name outside of Indiana, where he was a mayor and not a good one at that. Pete Buttigieg got the job because he is a homosexual. I don't think anyone what are you going to argue? His resume qualified him for that? He could not even argue why he was qualified to run the Department of Transportation. His only suggestion was that when he was young, he rode a train. I mean, I've flown an airplane, but I'm certainly not, I've ridden in an airplane numerous times, but I'm certainly not qualified to fly one or to be, head of the FAA because I've flown in an air. I mean, that's the ludicrous nature of some of these picks that are made. They're made based off of looks, sexual orientation, gender, not about whether or not they're actually qualified. And then Democrats find them. Listen, let's be honest. This is what happens when you pick people and put them in leadership and they have no basis for being there. I suppose you might get lucky every once in a while. You look at the older Democrats versus some of the younger, and Biden, even though he's a plagiarist and a liar and so forth, he did things as a U.S. senator. He managed to be well liked by certain colleagues and so forth, and so he had a resume, if you will. Maybe not an impressive one. Maybe some of it was made up, but he had a resume. But you see these other people, they just pick randomly. Beto O'Rourke is another. Stacey Abrams is an example. These are individuals that just get chosen by Democrats because they either think that they're Kennedy-esque like O'Rourke, or because of their skin color, or, again, you go down the list of attributes that they find to be somehow virtuous, and then they put them in these positions, and they just can't figure out how come they don't do the job very well. I mean, imagine any other position. We're going to hire a neurosurgeon, somebody that we have no concept whether they've ever done any neurosurgery or have any medical background, but we're going to pick a black lesbian. That's what we're going to do. We're going to pick a male black lesbian, figure that one out. But, hey, it's 2023. And then you put them in there, like, we just don't get it. I mean, the first 3 patients have died on the table. This is very confusing. We're beginning to lose confidence in this person. This is what happens when you pick people who do not belong in the job, and you pick people based on characteristics such as looks and gender and sexual orientation. They only get you so far. And by the way, do you think that it serves all of the young girls of color in this country well to have Kamala Harris be the leading example? To be some sort of role model, really? It's a disservice. Springfield's Talk 104.1, I'm Nick Reed. I love this story. Springfield and Greene County not taxing cannabis sales yet. Oh, they will. They will. So listen to this. This is KY3. Recreational marijuana sales are open. Oh, I mean, this is like just a blast for people. And I saw this story about the long waits, and some people had to wait an hour in line. I was like, thank God they weren't voting. I mean, oh my gosh.
They didn't have water.
Yeah, people have no trouble waiting in line. No complaints there. I'll wait 10 hours in line for some legal marijuana, but, voting, God forbid. Yeah, I hope no one starved to death or died from thirst. Recreational marijuana sales open for business. They're selling like hotcakes. Or, more accurately, they're selling like legal marijuana. And for dispensary workers, really, isn't that a weird sort of comparison? I know it's a cliche, but what do you think really is going to sell faster? Legalized marijuana or hotcakes? I think legalized marijuana, then the hotcakes after.
What about hotcakes with legalized marijuana in them?
Oh, yeah. Like instead of brownies,
Yeah.
you have pancakes or hotcakes. Yeah, that could be. So this is a part I just think, and it so sums up. You think about this. After you pay income taxes, you pay property taxes, you pay all these taxes. And it reads, let's see, excited customers, dispensaries around Springfield are projecting sales to break six figures by the end of the week. Right now, anyone who buys from a dispensary has to pay the state tax, the city tax, the county sales tax, which in Springfield comes to 8.1%. Then you have to pay 6% state tax for marijuana, but then there's another 3% tax that cities and counties could be charging, but they aren't right now. They will. I mean, it's all about figuring out the best marketing to get that tax raised, because you've got to put these on the ballot is the thing. And they recognize that people are getting sick and tired of being, that's always the answer. More money, more money, more money, more money. We got to get more money. And so they are a little more cautious and deliberate in their approach for such things. So I'm sure it'll eventually come around. And it'll probably pass, because this is one of those instances where a majority of people see it as not affecting me. And it's the old, when they came for the marijuana purchasers, I wasn't one of them, so I said nothing. So they'll vote to increase the tax. Now, understand it, list all those taxes. That's on top of the hidden tax you pay. The people who sell it, all of the taxes and the regulations, see, you're paying that as well. This is the thing about taxes on businesses. You pay them because do you know where they get the money to pay their taxes? They don't have a printing press. It comes from you. It comes from the cash drawer. So whenever the city or the state or the county or the federal government or and you have the property taxes, all of that, you pay that as well. You think about in one transaction how many different ways the government comes after you. And I mean, just 83 ways from Sunday they get you. They get you through the sellers, and then the distribution of it to the store itself. I mean, how it gets there, whatever business does that delivery, those taxes are passed along to you as well. Whomever's driving it there, the transportation, those taxes. I mean, you're paying for the taxes that go on the light. Everything you pay for. This, incidentally, is the idea behind instead being very transparent and having like a 23% sales tax on everything. Then none of those hidden taxes are there, see? You have no idea. I always knew the key to legalizing marijuana was the recognition by people in government as to how much more money of yours they could take in order to that would do it. And that's, of course, what we've seen. The minute they started, make it legal and tax it, they go, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Springfield's Talk 1041. My name is Nick Reed. Welcome to the show, streaming live, ksgf.com. If you miss any of the show, we have it up in the on-demand section, podcast, either at ksgf.com or the KSGF app. A lot of talk on social media, news coverage, Hotel of Terror. And it is, I think it's fair to say it's a landmark that is synonymous with Springfield for decades now. And it seemingly for a lot of people, at least in the public, popped up all of a sudden that the city's thinking about, buying it and having a third party come in and just determine what we all think of as eminent domain. And that is something that has apparently, to some degree, according to them, been in the works for a few years now, though I think it is, again, fair to say that most people in the general public are not aware of this at all. But even if you've not been to the Hotel of Terror, you're probably familiar with it. And so this, of course, is making the rounds. And you've got a couple of components to this. You do have the cultural component of it being part of Springfield, and then you have the component of government overreach, and then what many people already feel that Springfield demonstrates, and this is a we do whatever the hell we want, whether people like it or not, sort of attitude that people have been pushing back on for some time, and many people are going to see this as just, here we go again, another example of the arrogance of the city, fair or not. That's some of the themes that we're seeing on social media. Sterling Mathis, we're going to talk with him, the owner of Hotel Terror, here in just a couple of moments. First, Jason Rima with the latest news update. First alert forecast sponsored by St. Clair of the Ozarks Home Improvements. Mostly cloudy, 50% chance of rain, high of 48. Rain, 44 low tonight. Rain and windy, 49 tomorrow, Thursday, mostly sunny, a high of 51. Want to welcome in studio Sterling Mathis, owner of Hotel of Terror and Dungeons of Doom. Now, I'll say that it was actually the first time this year my wife and I, we took the girl child and some of her friends to Hotel of Terror. Enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. We really did. And in fact, we'd planned on afterwards. We're like, well, we're going to do both of them next year. I did not realize how long or how old, if you will, Hotel of Terror was. How long it's been around, since 79?
78.
78. I guess I didn't know. If somebody had asked me, I would not have known. So that's some time now.
Yeah, 78. I was 16, and it's been 45 years right now. This year will be 45 years.
So tell us about this. This apparently, according to the city's presentation is, oh, yeah, hey, everything's fine. We've been working together, but, yeah, we just haven't been able to come to an agreement. So we'll have some third party come in and help us out a bit. Give us some background on all of this, if you would.
Well, I mean, they've restarted this again in 2019, which, you know, if a lot of people know, it really started back in the 90s with the sprinkler system that they forced me to put in. You know, there was no reason for that. I was grandfathered in. They thought they could put me out of business with it. Didn't work, so several years after that, they'd close my road at October every year, building here, and I have people that work for them that said they told us to do it in October.
Pieces of trash.
So that's what they did, and then it brings us up to now. You know, when they said they've been working with me since 19, I mean, they didn't even offer me enough money to buy two nice vehicles, is what
Right.
they've offered me for 19. And now it's up a little bit, but it's still not where it needs to be.
Now, if I understand correctly, your position is not, by gosh, this is exactly where Hotel of Terror has to be. Your position is, all right, no, yeah, sure, I can move it, but you got to give me what's necessary in order to do that.
Right, right. The building is the haunt. Okay, I mean we have spent 40 plus years
Right.
building that to get it to where it is. I can't move it. The stuff is built into it. I will have to start from scratch. Some of the things can come out, but I need to create that same dark, grungy feel is
Yeah.
what I have to do. And I don't mind moving, but they're not even 50% of what it's going to
Right.
cost. And plus, I work a full-time job for another company, which I'm on the road a lot. So if I do move and this is all they're going to give me, I'll have to quit my other job. So I'm out that money as well.
Well, you got to understand, they, may not have that much money buying up sports stadiums and sports complexes, and
Yeah, I don't
they
have
seem to have no problem with money, spending other people's money.
I don't have the deep
Yeah.
pockets like they do. So, I've worked since I was 17 years old, been on my own since I was 17 years old. So it's difficult.
Yeah.
We get out there and we do what we can.
And for people who haven't been through it, I've been through a number of haunted houses, and oftentimes the infrastructure isn't there so much. It doubles as something else in the off season, and then it's just a lot of people jumping out. But the infrastructure is. I was very impressed by it when we went through it. It was much more than I thought that it would be.
Well, we're not a fly-by-night
No.
place. I mean, we're there for the duration. Every year we're ranked in the top 5 haunted houses in the whole state. The Hotel of Terror is
Wow.
always in the top 5. We was number 1 a couple years ago.
How many people come through? I'm sure you must keep count to some degree.
I'm not sure on
Got
the
it.
people. I mean, I know what I did dollar-wise. I don't know if I should be talking about it,
No,
but
I understand that. And I will say this. I sit and I do a lot of observing. And one of the aspects of the Hotel of Terror's existence that I actually liked is when we were standing there that evening and there was a line quite long and it was filled with young people that were socially interacting with each other. And in a day when it seems like that interaction has diminished by 90 to 95% because of social media and staying at home, it was nice to see. And I think it's genuinely good for young people to actually be face to face, hanging out with, laughing, joking with other human beings their age, as opposed to doing it all over social media.
right. Well, nowadays, you go in a restaurant, all the kids
I
are
know,
on their
yeah.
phone. Nobody's talking.
Right.
And you're right. You're 100% right. They communicate, they talk. That's part of the thrill. They're out there getting psyched up. They're telling stories
Yeah.
of what happened last
Yeah,
time.
it's true.
I mean,
It's true.
it's a fun deal.
It is a fun deal. We're going to take a quick break here, get a traffic update, and then continue with Sterling Mathis, Hotel of Terror owner, and what he's dealing with the city of Springfield. Springfield's Talk 1041. I'm Nick Reed. Talking with Sterling Mathis, owner of Hotel of Terror and Dungeons of Doom in the city of Springfield, is wanting to, I suppose to put it lightly, alterations in that area, and they say that that requires a move of Hotel of Terror. And generally, I think in the minds of people, whenever you have a government come in and say, "Oh, we need you to move," in their minds they think, well, this should be relatively easy for it to be fair, is figure out what all of the costs are going to be associated with that, and then pay that business owner that amount, and so that essentially there's no loss in any sort of revenue, there's no loss in funds, and you know, if that's done, they see that as fair. With that in mind, they may also wonder, well, what does it cost? Like, what costs are associated? Why can you not just pick up and move? And then this is going to be maybe a goofy question, but we do talk a lot about moving. Does this mean, because I know that I've seen it done before, picking up and moving the entire building, or have to build a new building? Talk about all of that and the cost involved.
Well, the building itself is the haunt, and that's the attraction. It's not, you know, the props inside. People have come down there since, you know, 1978, and that's what they expect, that old spiral staircase. It's creepy. I mean, there's blood oozing out of the windows. It's cool. Usually have a movie playing on the side for people that don't want to go through, which is fine too. But it's not a car lot or another business. You can't go in and move some file cabinets, a couple of desks, and go to another place, and you're set up in 15 minutes. I mean, it's part of the building. So it would be completely destroyed trying to move it. I would have to start from scratch. Now, some things, yes, I get. I can move. But, you know, I mean, even now, I've had the Dungeon of Doom running for 6 years. It only does about 25-30% of what the Hotel of Terror does. So, and the dungeon is twice as big. I think it's really, really cool inside, but still most people still go to the hotel.
They know it.
They know it. It's always a good time.
Part of the tradition. I'm trying to think. I've got a number of different questions here. How close are you all? And I know you may not want to get into specific numbers. I know I've seen some numbers reported. I mean, are they in a laughably distant place in terms of what would be needed?
Well, in 2019, when they started it, and they said they've been negotiating with me since 2019, it was laughable. Now it's less than half of what we need to be.
Do they, when these discussions occur, to whatever degree that they do, when they come to you with a number, are they recognizing that it's not, like, are they saying, no, we believe that this is enough? Or are they saying, well, we know it's not enough, but hey, let's be reasonable. This is all we have. What is their argument for the dollar amount that they provide?
Well, they've come with the third party that supposedly will move me, but they've not given me any numbers, nothing. I've tried to reach out to them. They have not responded with any type of numbers or how they're going to do this or how they're going to do that. So, and every time they do, it's a written form where they mail it to me, and this is what it is. And if I don't do this, we're looking at the eminent domain.
Right.
They throw that right out there.
Sure.
Every time.
Like that threat.
Bullying.
Yeah. So the number that they do provide, what do they base that on? Do they say?
Well, they say they base it on what buildings are worth in that area. Well, right now there's a building between my two buildings that's more money than what they're offering me for my 45-year business. So they're trying to get more for this building. It's listed for more than what they're trying to offer me.
We're talking with Sterling Mathis, owner of Hotel of Terror. The presentation that I'm hearing in the media is that a lot of this has to do with that bridge there, and it seems as if the narrative is that it's potentially dangerous, that and the only way to fix it is for you to not be there any longer. Your thoughts on that?
Well, when they started this, it was the bridge had a problem, so they don't let the CU buses drive over it. But there's no signage for anyone else. I've seen multiple semis go down through there, no problems at all. So if it's as dangerous as they say, why don't they have signs up that say, hey, this bridge is this amount of weight? I've not seen that. Secondly, when it started, they told me the bridge was too narrow. They had to widen it, which would take my property. So I did a little research on that. The brand new bridge at on Chestnut Street that goes over the railroad tracks there is 72 feet wide. The Chestnut St. Louis Bridge, 63 feet wide. Traffic way at Chestnut is only 36. All of these roads get more use than my road does. The Benton Avenue Viaduct, 57 feet. The Harry Cooper Bridge over on Chestnut is 72, and the Grant Street Bridge right there by the Dungeon is 58. So all the widest is 72. My bridge is 80 foot wide right now, so that holds no water either.
So the way that you describe how things have played out over time, from that to mentioning that they have managed to coincidentally need to shut down that area for was it construction or upgrades or whatever during October. Clearly, that's your time of the year. One might look at that and think, well, they're just screwing you around a little bit here, and that maybe the reasons that they're giving aren't really the most transparent reasons for why they want you gone. Why do you think, if it isn't really the bridge or whatever else they say, what's going on here?
Well, I think they've had this park planned for a long time in the system, on the drawing board. And I think they thought they could just put me out with the sprinklers back in the 90s. Once that didn't work, then they tried to restrict traffic flow for several years. Once that didn't work, now they kind of waited until now. And now that everybody knows their plans of the park and all this, now they're going to have to come forward with it and say, okay, we need your building. So now what's it going to cost? And, I don't mind moving. But
right.
I have to be. It has to be feasible. It has to be feasible for me to do it.
So you think ultimately this is part of their long-term picture? They've been wanting to do this for some time, and you just haven't been getting it, I guess.
I guess not.
You haven't been getting the hint.
I guess not. I'm slow, I guess. I don't know.
So what? Anything that you need people to know or want them to know, or I don't know if you're active on social media, kind of keep people updated, because the thing about stories like this, oftentimes people listen, they hear it, and then time will go by, and they're like, well, whatever happened with that? And they don't know. How can they, or if there is a way to keep updated on whatever the latest developments are before it's too late, because that oftentimes does happen too.
Well, the next city council meeting is February 21st. This will be the next council meeting,
okay.
So I'll be a little more prepared. It's when I found out it was going in front of the city council, it was last week. I mean, I had no time to prepare. So it was pretty quick. When they acted quick.
I think I know the answer to this question, and you probably have answered it in a number of different ways. But I want to ask it, given a number of different occurrences over the last several years in the city, in which those that are on the receiving end, or I should say in conflict with the city in terms of development, have argued the position that the city hasn't been straightforward, that often they're not necessarily honest, and it's they don't feel as if there's a real good faith effort there to work together. Do you feel that is going on with you as well?
Well, I believe that they have. I mean, they've been pretty upfront with me. But it's just, every time, again, it's, well, that's all we can do, or we're going to, start the condemnation process. And, it doesn't have to go to that.
Right.
We can work it out. If I was completely against the move and say, no, I'm not moving, stand there with my arms crossed with the bulldozer, that's not what I'm about. I don't mind moving. I can move it. I get they want to do a park. Right. That's fine. I don't have to be a part of that. But I have to have enough funds to be able to move it to my other property and make it work.
And you are now, just so people that are wondering, well, is he looking to come out ahead? Or are you just looking to come out straight even?
No, if they would say, here, sign this contract, and we will move you, and we will build it exactly what you say, and I would say, fine, I don't want a nickel. Just move me and set me up like I am right now. If we could do that, I'd be fine.
And so far, they have not said, okay, we'll do that.
No. No.
All right, so 21st you said is the next council
The
meeting?
21st,
21st,
yes.
and so is that the vote, or they'll decide? What do they decide at that vote
Well, I'm not
or
really
that
sure.
night?
I'm not
Okay.
real up on how that works, so I have
But
to
don't
see
you
how
have?
that works.
So now, theoretically, here there should be some council member that's working with you, right? You're supposed to be represented by these. That's the thing that always kills me, and I almost forget because Springfield seems so disconnected from the community. I forget. No, these are the people that are supposed to be helping you and working with you.
Well, after I said my piece, not one of them had any questions. They didn't ask me about pricing. They didn't ask me about what it was going to cost. They didn't ask me any questions. Nothing. So I was kind of shocked by that
Yeah.
nobody had a question for me.
That's unfortunate. Well, keep us in the loop if you would. We'll try to keep on top of this and any developments that come along. And if it is something that you think is noteworthy after that, or even before, if necessary, that 21st meeting, let us know, and we'll make sure either to get you on or get the word out, let people know the latest that's going on.
I appreciate it.
Hey, absolutely. Sterling Mathis, Hotel of Terrors, Springfield's Talk 1041. I'm Nick Reed. Now, a traffic update on Springfield's Talk 1041, the American Transmissions Talk and Text Line 447 KSGF. I'm Nick Reed. First Alert forecast sponsored by Navant Employee Benefits that work. Mostly cloudy with a 50% chance for rain today, high of 48. Rain low of 40 overnight tonight. Rain tomorrow, 49. Mostly sunny on Thursday, high of 51. Emily Johnson, House Theory Realty. Remember her name. Remember her business. She is under Nick's endorsement. She is a team in one. A lot of folks like the idea of having this massive team, and there's a point person for every different thing. You need advice on who to get to do a little work over here. Okay, this person on our team. Oh, you need somebody to give you advice on inspections. This person. You need somebody. Emily Johnson is all of those in one. So you never have to worry about anything falling through the cracks because there are none. It's all Emily Johnson, House Theory Realty. You can read reviews, people who have used her services, and you'll see what I'm saying. She is under Nick's endorsements for all your home buying and home selling needs. Emily Johnson, House Theory Realty. All right, let me see here. Kind of got myself discombobulated. There was a story I want to read. Actually, it's an op-ed. And it's funny because we just had the conversation with Sterling Mathis and interacting with the city in terms of his ownership of the Hotel of Terror. And when I came across this opinion piece in Newsweek by a doctor by the name of Kevin Bass, in my mind I was thinking this is a letter to Springfield to Greene County. And to virtually every government institution as we dealt with COVID. And I wanted to share it with you. As a medical student and researcher, I staunchly supported the efforts of the public health authorities when it came to COVID-19. I believe that the authorities responded to the largest public health crisis of our lives, dealing with it with compassion, diligence, scientific expertise. I was with them when they called for the lockdowns, for the vaccines and the boosters. I was wrong. We in the scientific community were wrong, and it cost lives. I can see now that the scientific community, from the CDC to the WHO to the FDA and their representatives, repeatedly overstated the evidence and misled the public about its own views and policies, including policies on natural versus artificial immunity, school closures, disease transmission, aerosol spread, mask mandates, vaccine effectiveness, and safety, especially among the young. All of these were scientific mistakes at the time, not in hindsight. Amazingly, some of these obfuscations continue to the present day. But perhaps more important than any individual error was how inherently flawed the overall approach of the scientific community was and continues to be. It was flawed in a way that undermines the efficacy and resulted in thousands, if not millions, of preventable deaths. What we did not properly appreciate is that preference determine how scientific expertise is used, and that our preferences might be, indeed, our preferences were very different from many of the people that we serve. We created policy based on our preferences, then justified it using data. And then we portrayed those opposing our efforts as misguided, ignorant, selfish, and even evil. We made science a team sport, and in doing so, we made it no longer science. It became us versus them, and they responded the only way anyone might expect them to, by resisting. We excluded important parts of the population from policy development and castigated critics, which meant that we deployed a monolithic response across an exceptionally diverse nation, forged a society more fractured than ever, and exasperated long-standing health and economic disparities. Our emotional response and ingrained partisanship prevented us from seeing the full impact of our actions on the people we are supposed to serve. We systematically minimized the downsides of the interventions we imposed without the input without the consent and recognition of those forced to live with them. In doing so, we violated the autonomy of those who would be most negatively impacted by our policies: the poor, the working class, small business owners, Black and Latinos, and children. These populations were overlooked because they were made invisible to us by their systematic exclusion from the dominant corporized media machine that presumed omniscience. Most of us did not speak up in support of alternative views, and many of us tried to suppress them. When strong scientific voices like world-renowned Stanford professor John Ioannidis, Jay Bhattacharya, and Scott Atlas, or University of California San Francisco professors Veena Prasad and Monica Gandhi, sounded the alarm on behalf of vulnerable communities, they faced severe censure by relentless mobs of critics and detractors in the scientific community, often not on the basis of fact, but solely on the basis of difference in scientific opinion. When former President Trump pointed out the downsides of intervention, he was dismissed publicly as a buffoon. And when Dr. Anthony Fauci opposed Trump and became the hero of the public health community, we gave him our support to do and say whatever he wanted, even when he was wrong. Trump was not remotely perfect, nor were the academic critics of consensus policy. But the scorn we laid on them was a disaster for public trust in the pandemic response. Our approach alienated large segments of the population from what should have been a national collaborative project, and we paid the price. The rage of those marginalized by the expert class exploded and dominated social media. Lacking the scientific lexicon to express their disagreement, many descendants turned to conspiracy theories and a cottage industry of scientific contortionists to make their case against the expert class consensus and dominated the pandemic mainstream. Labeling this speech as misinformation and blaming it on scientific illiteracy and ignorance, the government conspired with big tech to aggressively suppress it, erasing the valid political concerns of the government's opponents. And this despite the fact that pandemic policy was created by a razor-thin sliver of American society who anointed themselves to preside over the working class, members of academia, government, medicine, journalism, tech, and public health, who are highly educated and privileged. From the comfort of their privilege, this elite prizes paternalism, as opposed to average Americans who laud self-reliance and whose daily lives routinely demand that they reckon with risk. That many of our leaders neglected to consider the lived experience of those across the class divide is unconscionable. Incomprehensible to us, due to this class divide, we severely judged lockdown critics as lazy, backwards, even evil. We dismissed as grifters those who represented their interest. We believed misinformation energized the ignorant, and we refused to accept that such people simply had a different and valid point of view. We crafted policy for the people without even consulting them. If our public health officials had led with less hubris, the course of the pandemic in the United States might have had a very different outcome with far fewer lost lives. Instead, we have witnessed a massive and ongoing loss of life in America due to distrust of vaccines and the healthcare system, a massive concentration in wealth by already wealthy elites, a rise in suicides and gun violence, especially among the poor, a near doubling of the rate of depression and anxiety disorders, especially among the young, a catastrophic loss of educational attainment among already disadvantaged children, and among those most vulnerable, a massive loss of trust in healthcare, science, scientific authorities, and political leaders more broadly. My motivation for writing this is simple. It's clear to me that for public trust to be restored in science, scientists should publicly discuss what went right and what went wrong during the pandemic and where we could have done better. It's okay to be wrong and admit where one was wrong and what was learned. That's a central part of the way science works. Yet I fear that many are too entrenched in groupthink and too afraid to publicly take responsibility to do this. Solving these problems in the long term requires a greater commitment to pluralism and tolerance in our institutions, including the inclusion of critical, if unpopular, voices. Intellectual elitism, credentialism, and classism must end. Restoring trust in public health and our democracy depends on it. Now, again, when I read this, I just could not, locally anyhow, and I know this occurred all over the country, but think about all those press conferences where we would be shamed by elected officials or bureaucrats that had titles, the credentials amongst us, somebody who ran a hospital, though they didn't necessarily have any sort of actual medical background in the context of being some sort of doctor themselves. But because they were deemed the experts with the credentials, we all were supposed to listen to everything they said and take it at face value, not ask any questions whatsoever, and just assume that it's all true. Part of the problem that has occurred is wanting it both ways, and we heard this from Fauci quite often. When Fauci would take a hardcore position one way and criticize people who did not accept that position, and then 6 months or a year later would change his position, he would argue that that is part of science. It is that you are constantly getting new information and learning from it. The problem, however, is in the moment, nobody else could ever acknowledge that. So in other words, on a Monday, if the Greene County Health Department, based off the CDC or Anthony Fauci or the CEO of one of the hospitals, made some sort of declaration based off the information then, you had to pretend as if there was no possibility that it could be wrong because they don't have the additional information that they will have 6 months or a year from now. See, you are supposed to live in that very moment and accept what it was that they recommended as if there is no possibility that they might be wrong, while they are given the privilege of doing just that and recognizing that with new information comes new understanding of how to deal with certain things. And trying to have it both ways does just what this doctor is writing about. It creates a massive distrust. The distrust was never crafted, created, or bred by people who simply took a scientific approach and asked questions. The distrust was created by those who said you can't ask questions because we are the authority figures, and even though we may, 6 months from now, take a totally different position, it's because we are who we are and you are who you are, and you must listen to us. Not science, but us. As Fauci famously said in his mind, if you disagree with him, you disagree with science, which is one of the single most anti-science statements a person can make. Springfield's Talk 104.1, I'm Nick Reed. Sarah Myers.
Beatles property maintenance. First things first, Beatles is spelled Beadles. What do they do?
I was watching, what was it, a movie or... Oh, I know what it was. Little House on the Prairie, and the one one-room schoolhouse. That was the teacher's name, Miss Beatles.
Oh, well, nice way to tie that in. I haven't watched that in forever.
I was watching it the other day. I started watching the episode 1, and I just thought, man, when you think of shows then versus the crap, just the nutty crap that they put on TV. It's like, what is so wrong with having just good, wholesome storylines anymore?
I'm surprised I haven't watched it in a while. I was out of internet for 2 weeks out at my house, so I am surprised because I'm pretty sure that's on just the regular TV.
It's on. Well, it may be.
I think it is.
I think a Cozy or one of those channels. Is that over the air? Is Cozy over the air? I don't know.
So.
We have YouTube TV, so sometimes
gotcha.
I forget.
All right. Well, Beatles. What do they do? Well, I'll tell you what they do. They do a variety of high-quality property maintenance and repairs. Now, when something pops up and it's unexpected with your home, that can be very frustrating, especially trying to find somebody to get in there in a timely manner that's not going to nickel and dime you to death, that they're going to be upfront and honest. That's why I love to recommend Beatles Property Maintenance, because they will be upfront and honest with you, and they'll get in there within that timely manner, and they'll just shoot you straight. Now, they can help you out with a lot of those big-name items. Maybe you have some crawl space issues that you need done, and you don't want to go down there. I don't blame you. That's why you send the Beatles Property Maintenance team. If you got mold, if you've got some water restoration, some leaks that have happened throughout the years, they can help you out with those items as well. But they can also help you out with those smaller everyday items as well. Maybe you need a new toilet, maybe you're wanting new ceiling fans, or maybe you're just wanting new lights, fixtures around your house altogether. Beatles Property Maintenance, they can help you out with that as well. So whether you have a list of items that need to be done around your home or some big ticket items, Beatles Property Maintenance, they can help you out with all of those items. Now you can find all of their contact information housed at ksgf.com under the Sarah's Endorsements tab.
I want to try to hit some of this, though. I fear I won't have the time to do it justice, which always puts me in this sort of, I don't know, position of should I or shouldn't I, but I'm going to go ahead, and because it's got some of the latest questions that have developed regarding the Biden administration's so-called answers to the Chinese balloon fiasco. And they have this amazing knack of answering a question, and for every question they answer, it breeds 2 new questions. And so the Chinese balloon story is even bigger than it seems. Byron York notes that the Chinese balloon matter has become far more serious in recent hours, and it was serious enough to begin with. Of course, there's a lot of questions in the aftermath of the U.S. Air Force shoot-down of the balloon off the coast of South Carolina Saturday. Questions such as, what specifically was it spying on? What information had it gathered? When was the United States aware of its existence? Will experts be able to secure enough of the wreckage from the ocean floor to answer those and other questions? But there are perhaps more troubling questions raised by the conduct of top Biden administration officials. First, they sought political cover by claiming that Chinese spy balloons had overflown the U.S. 3 times during the Trump administration, and nobody did anything about them at the time. Then, when a chorus of high-ranking officials of the Trump years said, with one voice, that simply did not happen, the Biden team responded with an explanation that strains credulity, and that is where we are now. As the balloon drifted across the U.S., starting in Alaska, then into Canada, then from Idaho all the way to South Carolina, with the Biden administration refusing to take it down, Republicans were appalled at the White House's tepid response to such a blatant violation of American airspace and sovereignty. Shoot the damn thing down, many of them urged Biden to do. Biden tried to make himself look tough by saying he ordered the balloon shot down, but that the military officials argued doing so would be too dangerous for people on the ground. That argument made little sense when the balloon was over empty areas of the U.S., in the Aleutian Islands, Alaska, Idaho, Montana. Yet Biden deferred to his military commanders as the balloon was allowed to fly across the entire continental U.S., possibly sending back intelligence to the Chinese the whole way. Biden officials suggested that they had somehow neutralized the balloon's intelligence-gathering capabilities, but did not offer details. Now, I, once again, am going to throw in the fact that one of those military individuals is Milley. Milley, who is somebody that we know, through his own admission, undermined the presidency by talking directly to his Chinese counterparts, telling them, don't worry if Trump, while president's ever going to do anything overt, if ever there's going to be some sort of response attack on China, I'll call you and give you a heads up before it happens. We cannot dismiss that as if it's nothing. And given this, if Milley was involved in any of these decision-making aspects of this, was he also one of those that advised Biden not to do this? I think that if he was, and given that he has acknowledged that he has undermined a previous presidency when Trump was president, there are some serious questions that need to be answered here. And the fact that these questions aren't even being asked is, to me, bothersome. I've got to just take a 60-second break here, and then I'll return on with a few more of these points. We'll get the piece in its entirety posted because it lays out some new information and asks relevant questions to that new information. Springfield's Talk 104.1. I'm Nick Reed. I'm going to summarize the rest of this Washington Examiner piece by Byron York. The Chinese balloon story is even bigger than it seems, just because of time constraints. But the rest of what he focuses on here, some of the details involved in the fact that at one point you had people from the administration, the Pentagon specifically, leaking information, trying to make it seem like, oh, well, this happened during Trump years and he knew about it and he didn't do anything, which many people saw as a way to try to absolve Biden, that, well, Trump did the same thing. But then quickly the word began to come out that, well, no, Trump didn't know about it. Not only that, nobody knew about it, and trying to claim that, at this point, well, we found out about it recently that this was done years ago. Now, I don't know how that works, what security tapes you go back and look at. I'm being a little facetious here. So I don't trust any of these people any longer. They've given all of us reason not to trust them. So I just don't know if any of that makes sense. But what that leads to is a speculation as to why are there so many stories going on here? What is the situation? And is this, some butt covering that is going on? Is this something more? He writes, in a text exchange, one Capitol Hill Republican eager to question the administration on events saw three possible explanations for all the different stories here. One, the Defense Department is conflating wildly different incidents. That is, balloons around Hawaii or Key West versus crossing Middle America. Conflation he called partisan spin. Two, the Pentagon really did only figure out that the Chinese were flying over the U.S. after the fact, which he called a huge military intelligence failure. Or three, the military actually tracked the flights at the time but failed to inform civilian leadership of what happened, which he called a huge civilian military scandal, if so. Glenn Beck's next. I'm Nick Reed. Talk to you tomorrow.